I want you to think about the first time you had sex. Do you remember feeling ready? Were you sure you were doing something you really wanted to? That the other person was? Do you remember communicating consent, yours and theirs? If you didn't answer yes to all of those questions, why? Because most of us didn't learn basic skills in sexual communication through our school-based sex education. Consent wasn't even considered. Sexuality education, when provided to adolescents, and this is not unique to Ireland, has for the most part focused on sexual risk avoidance, specifically teenage pregnancy and acquiring an STI, preferably through abstinence. Sex is bad outside marriage. But what if we refocus? If we make the goal of reducing rates of sexual assault and violence the outcome of sexuality education, instead of reducing teenage pregnancy rates? If young people have access to accurate sexual health information and are supported in developing the skills, language, and confidence to express themselves, and crucially, to interpret and understand what is being communicated to them, I believe there could be a global impact on rates of sexual assault and violence if comprehensive, inclusive sexuality education was available to all young people. As part of my PhD research, we conducted the largest survey of sexual behaviour and attitudes ever undertaken in Ireland with university students. During follow-up interviews with a number of them, I asked about their school-based sex education. One person summed up the experience of a generation. I always thought it was lacking because it's such an important thing in people's lives. And I think at that point, education has failed us because we haven't had enough information. And I know people who have had sex and years later realized that they regretted it. And I think a large part of that was due to not actually getting the proper instruction at school. Why was that? Well, as one of our most eminent sociologists, Tom Inglis, says, in order to understand the present, we have to look to the past. Sexuality and its expression was influenced for previous generations by the very close relationship between the Irish state and the Catholic Church, a celibate institution. Let's just take a moment for that to sink in. And continues to be. It may surprise you to know that relationships and sexuality education is compulsory in our schools. Again, this is not unique to Ireland, but compulsory doesn't mean delivered. There's another crucial proviso in Ireland, that the ethos of the school can influence how and the extent to which the course content is delivered. Considering that the majority of schools here have a Catholic ethos that promotes abstinence outside of marriage, this is a significant concern. It is one that the Sex Ed Bill, currently before Parliament here, seeks to change. A male student I interviewed raised a couple of points I think worth making here. And he said, my understanding of consent now versus when I was 10 years younger, just 18, 19, is different. I'm still figuring it out. My idea of what rape was when I was 10 years younger was much more violent than people would define it now. This is important because it reflects a shift in his understanding over time. We need such a change in understanding as to what rape really means, not just societally, but so that future generations are in no doubt that sex without consent is rape, and what this means, both by definition and in consequences. Another element to my work is co-facilitating a sexual health module with second-level students at the alma mater of my colleague, Richie Sadlier, a school that strives to provide a holistic education in the truest sense. There is confidence in and support for a module that goes far beyond the existing relationships and sexuality curriculum. On week 1, we asked the students what are the 3 topics they'd like to explore during the module. There is remarkable consistency in these: consent, healthy relationships, and contraception. We see how conscious yet confused they are of issues related to consent, how genuinely anxious they are of ever finding themselves in a non-consensual situation. They're also very aware of gendered stereotypes that are so embedded culturally and societally, in which males are predatory, females passive. We challenge these. Their skewed understanding, informed in part by a seemingly relentless media discourse, is that it's the responsibility of males to seek consent, females to give. I advocate for equality in the communication of consent that is mutual and bidirectional. That is equality of responsibility. Because anything less than that demonizes men and infantilizes women. Consent is too important to reduce it to a gender conflict. Immersed as I am in all things consent for the past number of years, for me, it transcends gender. It transcends sexual orientation. It transcends sexual identity. In my experience as a facilitator of sexual consent workshops at 3rd level, I see questionable value in introducing the concept at this stage if people are having sexual experiences before then and aren't skilled or confident in the communication of consent. In reality, to paraphrase the Swedish adage, sex education starts when education starts. It needs to be introduced at preschool level, because here's the thing. Sexuality education isn't all about sex. Consent isn't actually about sex. It is crucial in a sexual encounter, yes, but understanding respect and boundaries is central to understanding consent. This approach works successfully in the Netherlands. A Dutch colleague of mine told me that she remembers learning through simple, age-appropriate games and role play what consent is and how it can be communicated. Introducing sexuality education at this stage means it can be built on through primary and secondary level. Now, of course, for this to happen in any meaningful way, and here's where you come in, we need real cooperation between educators. That is, formal educators in the school system, parents, guardians, and us as a wider community to normalise conversations around sex and sexuality. If we have the goal of reducing rates of sexual assault and violence, we need to commit as a community, both national and international, to supporting comprehensive, inclusive sexuality education for all young people. They deserve to fully understand their sexuality and that potential consequences of engaging in sexual activity comes from a place of informed sexual decision-making. Thank you.